People think the biggest lies are whispered in the dark. They're wrong. The biggest lies are spoken at the altar, with everyone smiling. 5 minutes before the wedding was supposed to begin, I stood alone behind the chapel, holding a bouquet of white peonies that smelled like fresh rain and spring mornings, while my hands shook hard enough to scatter tiny petals across the polished wooden floor. My name is Claire Bennett, and I arrange flowers for people celebrating the happiest days of their lives. At 29, I had learned that flowers never judged anyone. Roses didn't care that I wore plus-size dresses. Lilies never looked twice when strangers assumed I was the assistant instead of the owner of my little flower shop in Brooklyn. Flowers simply bloomed where they were planted. People were different. They noticed everything. They noticed my size before they noticed my smile. They noticed my clothes before they noticed how carefully I worked. They noticed everything except the truth standing right in front of them. That morning, I had arrived before sunrise to decorate St. Michael's Chapel, transforming polished oak pews into soft rivers of ivory blossoms. The bride wanted elegance without extravagance. The groom wanted perfection. The families wanted photographs that looked expensive. I only wanted everything to survive until the ceremony ended without another guest reminding me that someone more glamorous should have been hired for such an exclusive event. I kept my head down and worked. It was easier that way. The chapel slowly filled with the scent of eucalyptus, garden roses, and fresh greenery, while sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting ribbons of blue and crimson across the marble floor. Every arrangement sat exactly where I had planned it, every ribbon perfectly tied. Then I reached for the bridal bouquet one last time. Something inside felt wrong, too heavy. At first I blamed my imagination, but florists know flowers the way musicians know melodies. We notice when something is out of place. Carefully, I loosened the satin ribbon wrapped around the stems. A tiny waterproof envelope slid into my hand before landing silently against my apron. My heartbeat stumbled. There was no name on it. No decoration. Only a single sentence typed in black ink. Give this to the right person before they say, I do. I stared at the envelope while laughter drifted from the bridal suite down the hallway. Whoever hid it had known exactly where I would find it. Whoever left it expected me to make a choice. And somewhere beyond the chapel doors, another guest had just arrived. I hadn't seen him yet, but every voice outside suddenly became quieter, every conversation shorter, as if the entire building had remembered how to hold its breath. I slipped the envelope into the deep pocket of my apron before anyone could notice, but it felt heavier with every step I took toward the sanctuary. My mind kept searching for a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a forgotten note between family members. Maybe it contained wedding vows someone had misplaced. Maybe I was letting my imagination turn an ordinary mistake into something dramatic simply because I had spent too many years expecting life to surprise me in the worst ways. Then I remembered the sentence. Give this to the right person before they say, I do. Whoever wrote those words had not been asking for a favor. They had been issuing a warning. The wedding coordinator hurried toward me, her headset buzzing with constant instructions. Claire, we need the bridal bouquet in exactly 4 minutes. I smiled automatically and nodded, even though my pulse refused to slow down. As she disappeared around the corner, I glanced toward the entrance of the chapel. Black luxury vehicles lined the curb outside, and guests who had been chatting moments earlier suddenly stepped aside, without anyone asking them to. It was strange how silence could spread through a crowd faster than excitement. A tall man stepped through the front doors wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that looked understated only because confidence made expensive things appear effortless. His dark hair was neatly combed back, and every movement carried calm authority instead of arrogance. I did not know his name yet, but I knew exactly who everyone else believed he was. Nobody rushed to greet him. Nobody blocked his path. They simply made room. The air itself seemed to rearrange around him. He acknowledged people with brief nods before taking a seat near the front, his expression unreadable beneath the colorful light pouring through the stained glass. Something about him made the chapel feel smaller. I looked away before he could notice me watching. My attention returned to the envelope. Curiosity finally defeated caution. Shielding it behind a display of white hydrangeas, I carefully opened the seal. Instead of a letter, I found a slim flash drive and a folded card. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. If this wedding continues, an innocent family will lose everything. Trust the evidence, not the promises. No signature. No explanation. Only those words. My throat tightened. I should have walked away. I should have handed the bouquet to the bride and finished the job I had been paid to do. Instead, I closed my fingers around the flash drive, realizing that someone had trusted the least noticeable person in the room to carry the most dangerous truth. I had exactly 3 minutes before the music would begin, and every second made the flash drive feel heavier in my pocket. My phone rested inside my floral supply bag near the side entrance, but the chapel had excellent security, and the signal inside the thick stone walls barely existed. Even if I managed to find a computer, what if the files contained nothing but rumors? What if I destroyed 2 families because I believed an anonymous note? I closed my eyes for a single breath, reminding myself that I was a florist, not an investigator. My job was to arrange flowers, smile politely, and disappear before the dance floor opened. Yet my feet refused to move. Across the sanctuary, the groom, Ethan Walker, laughed with several guests, looking every bit the successful businessman people admired. His tailored tuxedo fit perfectly, and he shook hands with effortless confidence. The bride, Vanessa Sinclair, stood beneath soft lights while her bridesmaids adjusted the delicate veil flowing behind her like morning mist. She looked radiant, but every few seconds her eyes darted toward the entrance instead of toward the man she was about to marry. It was subtle enough that almost nobody noticed. Almost nobody except someone who spent her career studying tiny details. Flowers taught patience. Weddings taught observation. I had learned long ago that people often revealed themselves during the moments they believed no one was watching. Then I noticed him again. The man in the charcoal suit had not spoken much since arriving, yet people continued acknowledging him with quiet respect. A silver-haired gentleman leaned close, whispered something into his ear, and immediately stepped back. The man answered with a calm nod that somehow ended the conversation without another word. There was no performance in his authority. It existed naturally, like gravity. A young server carrying a tray of sparkling water stumbled when her shoe caught the edge of the carpet. Before anyone else reacted, he rose smoothly from his seat and steadied the tray with one hand, preventing dozens of crystal glasses from crashing onto the marble floor. He offered the embarrassed server a reassuring smile instead of criticism. She thanked him with watery eyes, and he simply returned to his seat as though kindness required no audience. That unexpected moment unsettled me more than anything else I had seen. Powerful men were supposed to demand attention. This one seemed more interested in protecting other people from embarrassment than collecting admiration. My fingers tightened around the hidden flash drive. Without understanding why, one impossible thought entered my mind. Maybe the anonymous note had not been asking me to find the police. Maybe it had been asking me to find the only person in the room who could recognize the truth before it was too late. The organ began to play, soft and steady, filling every corner of the chapel with a melody that should have sounded joyful. Instead, every note tightened the knot in my stomach. Guests stood as Vanessa appeared at the entrance, her father offering his arm with practiced confidence. Cameras lifted into the air. Smiles spread across familiar faces. The florist in me admired how perfectly the white peonies framed the aisle. The woman holding a hidden flash drive could barely breathe. I handed the bridal bouquet to Vanessa just before she took her first step. Our eyes met for the briefest moment. Up close, her makeup was flawless, but the fear behind her smile was impossible to disguise. She whispered, almost too quietly to hear, "Thank you." It sounded less like gratitude and more like a farewell. I stepped aside as she walked toward Ethan beneath the stained glass windows. Every guest followed her with admiration. Every guest except one. The man in the charcoal suit never looked at the dress, the flowers, or the decorations. His attention remained fixed on the expressions of the bride and groom, as though he were reading a conversation no one else could hear. The ceremony moved forward with graceful precision. The officiant welcomed family and friends. Ethan repeated every response without hesitation. Vanessa answered clearly, yet her fingers tightened around the bouquet until several stems bent beneath the satin ribbon. My pocket suddenly felt impossibly warm. I could almost hear the anonymous message repeating inside my head. Before they say I do. I glanced toward the chapel doors. I could still leave. Nobody expected a florist to remain once the ceremony began. I could walk away, drive back to Brooklyn, and pretend none of this had ever happened. Tomorrow I would arrange flowers for another celebration, and life would continue exactly as it always had. Except I knew it would not. Some choices followed you long after the day ended. The officiant smiled warmly before asking the familiar question every wedding guest expected to hear. If anyone present knows of any lawful reason these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace. Silence settled across the chapel. My heartbeat echoed louder than the music. I felt my legs move before my mind agreed. One step, then another. Gasps rippled through the pews as I walked into the aisle, my apron still dusted with bits of eucalyptus leaves. Every eye turned toward me. The officiant looked confused. Ethan frowned. Vanessa went completely still. My voice trembled, but the words escaped anyway. I am so sorry, but someone left evidence inside the bridal bouquet because they believed this wedding should not continue. For one endless second, nobody spoke. Then the man in the charcoal suit slowly rose from his seat, looked directly at me with calm, unwavering eyes, and said in a voice that carried through the entire chapel, "Let her finish." I wanted to disappear the second those words left my mouth. Every instinct told me I had made the worst mistake of my life. Hundreds of unfamiliar faces stared at me with the same mixture of confusion and disbelief, and I could almost hear them wondering why a florist had interrupted a wedding that had taken months to plan. Ethan recovered first. His smile returned so quickly it almost looked genuine. He spread his hands in a calm gesture and laughed softly. I think there has been some misunderstanding. Weddings can be emotional, and perhaps someone thought this was a prank. Several guests nodded, relieved by the simple explanation. It was the kind of answer people preferred because it required no difficult questions. My fingers tightened around the flash drive hidden in my palm. "This is not a prank," I said quietly. "I found this inside the bridal bouquet along with a message asking me to stop the ceremony before your vows were completed." Ethan looked toward me with practiced patience. "Then give it to me. Whatever someone left, we will sort it out privately after the ceremony." Before I could answer, the man in the charcoal suit took one measured step into the aisle. His voice never rose, yet every conversation stopped the instant he spoke. "No." That single word settled over the chapel with astonishing weight. He turned toward the officiant with calm respect. "Please pause the ceremony." Nobody argued with him. Not the officiant. Not the families. Not even Ethan. The silence itself revealed more about the man than any introduction ever could. He looked at me for the first time without the distance of a stranger. "What is your name?" I swallowed hard. "Claire Bennett." He nodded once. "Miss Bennett, did anyone ask you to interrupt this ceremony?" "No." "Did anyone threaten you?" "No." "Then why are you standing here?" My heart pounded so loudly I wondered if everyone could hear it. Because I could not live with myself if I ignored something that might hurt innocent people. For the first time, the corners of his expression softened almost imperceptibly. He extended his hand toward me, not as a command, but as an invitation. "May I see what you found?" I placed the small flash drive into his open palm. He examined it for only a second before handing it to one of the men standing quietly a few rows behind him. "Verify its contents immediately," he said. The man accepted it with a respectful nod and left the chapel without rushing. Ethan finally lost a trace of his composure. "This is absurd," he protested. "You are delaying my wedding because of an anonymous storage device." The man in the charcoal suit met his eyes without the slightest hint of anger. "If it contains nothing, your ceremony will continue. If it contains the truth, stopping for a few minutes will be the least important thing that happens today." No one spoke after that. We all waited together, listening to nothing except the quiet ticking of the chapel clock. The waiting felt longer than it could have been. Every tick of the chapel clock echoed through the silence while nobody dared return to casual conversation. Vanessa lowered her bouquet, her shoulders slowly sinking as though she had been carrying something much heavier than flowers. Ethan continued forcing polite smiles toward the guests, but the confidence that had filled his voice only moments earlier had begun to fade. I stood alone in the center aisle, painfully aware that I did not belong among families wearing custom suits and designer dresses. I was still just the florist with bits of greenery clinging to the front of my apron. Then the chapel doors opened. The man who had taken the flash drive returned with measured steps and quietly handed a tablet to the man in the charcoal suit. He studied the screen without speaking. No dramatic reaction crossed his face. No anger. No surprise. Only complete focus. After several long seconds, he looked up at Ethan. Would you like to explain why documents prepared for this marriage transfer control of the Sinclair Family Charitable Foundation immediately after the ceremony? A wave of confused whispers spread through the pews. Ethan blinked once before answering. That is standard legal language. My attorneys handled everything. The man lowered the tablet. Interesting, because these files also include revised financial agreements that were never presented to the Sinclair family. They redirect significant assets into companies that exist only on paper. Several guests exchanged startled glances. Vanessa slowly turned toward Ethan. What is he talking about? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Ethan reached for her hand, but she stepped back before he could touch it. Vanessa, do not listen to this. Someone manipulated those files. The man in the charcoal suit remained perfectly calm. Perhaps, which is why I also asked my office to verify the digital signatures before speaking. He paused only long enough for every eye in the chapel to find him again. The signatures match. The words landed softly, yet they carried enough weight to drain every trace of celebration from the room. Vanessa closed her eyes, taking one slow breath before opening them again. Is it true? She asked Ethan. This time he did not answer immediately. His silence said more than any explanation could have. Tears gathered in Vanessa's eyes, not from humiliation, but from disappointment, so deep it seemed to empty the room of air. The officiant quietly closed the ceremony book resting in his hands. No announcement was necessary. Everyone understood. The man in the charcoal suit turned toward the guests with quiet dignity. This ceremony will not continue today. Nobody challenged his decision. For the first time since I had stepped into the aisle, I realized I was no longer trembling. The truth had done something fear never could. It had changed the direction of an entire day. People did not leave right away. They simply stood there, caught between disbelief and relief, unsure whether to comfort the bride or pretend nothing extraordinary had happened. I quietly stepped away from the center aisle, hoping to disappear before anyone remembered I was the one who had interrupted the ceremony. That had always been my talent. Blend into the background. Let the flowers receive the compliments while I packed away empty boxes and ribbon scraps. I almost reached the side door when a calm voice stopped me. Miss Bennett. I turned slowly. The man in the charcoal suit was walking toward me alone. Without the crowd around him, he somehow seemed even more composed. I never thanked you, he said. I blinked in surprise. I was only trying to do the right thing. He studied me for a quiet moment before offering a small smile. Most people convince themselves that the right thing can wait until tomorrow. His words settled somewhere deep inside me. I looked down at my hands, still stained faintly green from trimming eucalyptus stems before sunrise. Honestly, I almost walked away. But you did not. I was afraid. Courage is usually afraid, he replied. Otherwise it is only convenience. I let out a nervous laugh that escaped before I could stop it. You make it sound simple. It never is. We stood in comfortable silence while workers carefully removed chairs near the altar. Guests slowly drifted toward the exits, speaking in hushed voices. After a few moments, I finally asked the question that had been lingering in my mind since he first entered the chapel. Who are you? He looked toward the stained glass windows before answering. Damien Moretti. The name explained everything. I had heard it before, whispered by suppliers, restaurant owners, and business people who always lowered their voices afterward. Stories surrounded his name, but standing a few feet away from him, none of those rumors matched the man I had actually met. He noticed my expression and smiled faintly. You have heard many things. Some. Believe the ones about keeping my word. Before I could respond, one of his associates approached and quietly informed him that Vanessa and her family wished to thank him personally. Damien nodded, then looked back at me instead of following the man. There is something you should know. His voice softened. When the young server nearly dropped her tray earlier, you were already moving toward her before I stood up. I frowned. I did not even realize. I did. He folded his hands calmly. Everyone else was watching important people. You were watching the person who needed help. For the second time that day, I found myself unable to speak. Damien gave one respectful nod before turning away, leaving me with the strange realization that while I had believed nobody ever noticed me, someone had been paying attention long before I ever noticed him. By late afternoon, the chapel looked almost ordinary again. The musicians had packed their instruments. The photographers had quietly left, and workers carefully removed arrangements that had been designed for a celebration that never happened. I knelt beside the altar, gathering loose stems and ribbons into a cardboard box, trying to convince myself that once I drove back to Brooklyn, this unbelievable day would slowly become a strange memory. My phone buzzed inside my apron pocket. It was the wedding coordinator informing me that my payment had already been processed and apologizing for everything that had happened. I smiled faintly. None of it had been her fault. As I carried the last arrangement toward the delivery van, I noticed a black sedan waiting near the chapel entrance. Damien Moretti stepped outside just as I placed the flowers into the back of my van. He was no longer surrounded by guests or quiet conversations. For the first time all day, he looked like an ordinary man standing beneath a clear afternoon sky. He walked over holding a simple cream-colored envelope. "Miss Bennett," he said, "this belongs to you." I accepted it carefully. It felt thick enough to contain a check. "I cannot take this," I answered before even opening it. "You have not looked inside." "I do not need to." He regarded me with curious amusement. Most people would have opened it before refusing. I smiled. Most people probably have larger shops than mine. His expression softened. "You saved an entire family from making a decision they could not undo." I shook my head gently. "The truth did that. I only carried it." He waited for a moment before asking, "Then what would you accept?" The question caught me completely off guard. I thought about overdue rent for my little storefront, the delivery van that made a strange noise every morning, and the refrigerator that struggled to keep fresh flowers alive during summer weekends. Every practical part of me wanted to open the envelope. Instead, I handed it back. "If you really want to thank me, remember that people who work quietly deserve to be noticed before they are desperate." Damien looked at the envelope in my hand, but did not take it immediately. For the first time since I had met him, I saw genuine surprise replace his steady confidence. Finally, he accepted it with a slow nod. "Do you know how many people have ever returned something I freely offered?" "No, neither do I." A warm breeze carried the scent of peonies across the church steps. Damien glanced toward the flowers before looking back at me. "Money can solve many problems, Claire. Character cannot be purchased." I climbed into my delivery van, still uncertain whether I had made the sensible choice. As I started the engine, I caught one last glimpse of Damien standing beside the chapel, watching my old van disappear into traffic with the thoughtful expression of a man who had just discovered something infinitely rarer than wealth. 3 months passed before I saw Damien Moretti again. Autumn had settled over Brooklyn, painting the sidewalks with shades of amber and gold while crisp morning air drifted through the open door of my little flower shop. Business was steady, never extraordinary, but enough to keep fresh blooms in the cooler and hope alive in my heart. Life had quietly returned to its familiar rhythm. Most customers had no idea that I had once stood in the middle of a wedding and changed its ending. I preferred it that way. One quiet Tuesday afternoon, the bell above the front door chimed softly. Without looking up, I smiled and said the same words I greeted every customer with. "Welcome. I will be with you in just a moment." I finished wrapping a bouquet of sunflowers before turning around. Damien stood near the entrance holding nothing in his hands. No associates. No expensive convoy waiting outside. No quiet display of authority. Just a dark navy overcoat and the relaxed expression of someone who had finally found the place he intended to visit all along. "Good afternoon, Miss Bennett," he said. I laughed. "You know my first name now." "Then good afternoon, Claire." He looked around the shop, admiring shelves filled with fresh eucalyptus, roses, and wildflowers. "This place suits you." I felt strangely proud hearing those words. "It is small. So are seeds," he answered. "That does not stop them from becoming something remarkable." We spoke for nearly an hour about ordinary things. Seasonal flowers. Neighborhood families. The challenge of keeping hydrangeas fresh during unexpected warm days. Not once did he mention the interrupted wedding or the envelope I had refused. As he prepared to leave, he finally glanced toward a bucket filled with white peonies. "Those were your favorite choice for that ceremony," he observed. I smiled. "You remembered." "I remember people who changed the direction of a day." He selected a single white peony and placed it gently on the counter. "I would like to buy this one." I wrapped it in simple paper before telling him the price. Instead of reaching for his wallet immediately, Damien looked at me with the same calm certainty I remembered from the chapel. "The first time we met, I offered you money because I believed gratitude could be measured." He paused before continuing. I was wrong. He paid for the flower, accepted the small bundle with genuine care, and then asked, would you allow me to take you to dinner one evening when neither of us is rescuing anyone? I laughed so warmly that several customers smiled without knowing why. I think I would like that. As he walked toward the door, sunlight spilled across the shop floor, catching the soft white petals in his hand. Watching him leave, I realized flowers had taught me something I had never fully understood until that moment. The strongest roots do not grow where life is easiest. They grow where honesty is brave enough to bloom first.